Alright everybody, in today's video we're going to be looking at winters from the past that look pretty similar to this upcoming winter in terms of sea surface temperature configurations across the globe and how they worked out in terms of temperatures, precipitation, and snowfall. Before we get started, I would appreciate it if you were to hit that subscribe button. We have plenty more content just like this about the upcoming winter, also about live weather events as well. Starting off with December to March in all our analog years from 57 to 58 all the way to 9-10. You can see that above average temperatures are favored in the northern parts of the country, with below average temperatures generally favored in the southern US. That little slither in between is average temperatures. Now when it comes to precipitation, the west coast looks very wet. Also along the Gulf Coast, all the way up the east coast looks to have above average precipitation for this upcoming winter based on our analogs. Now back into the Midwest, you can see that slightly below average precipitation is favored also in the northern Rockies here as well. So these two areas right there. Briefly looking at current sea surface temperatures, you can see that well above average sea surface temperatures are present in the Enzo region with that strong El Nino going. Now we do have more of a central to east based El Nino right now, more so east based. By the time winter comes around, we expect this to be evenly distributed along the entire basin, so a basin-wide strong El Nino event. To really get cold and snowy conditions in the east and central parts of the US, you would need to see more of a west-based Modoki El Nino, but that is not what we expect going into this upcoming winter season. You can see it matches up pretty well with our analogs right here. Now let's go month by month. Starting off with December, it does pain me to say this, but if you're looking for a nice cold and snowy nostalgic Christmas time in the central and eastern parts of the country, where it's just like that Christmas card and it's everything you dreamed of when you look at the movies and all the Hallmark films, unfortunately it does not look to work out that way this upcoming winter. This winter looks to be more of a backloaded winter, especially in the month of February. But starting off with December, you can see that well above average temperatures are favored from the upper Midwest, straight through the Great Lakes and into the Northeast. Below average temperatures are favored in the Southwest for December. Now when it comes to precipitation, it looks to be a very wet December in much of the eastern US, but especially along the Gulf Coast, even places along the Mississippi River all the way as far north as Chicago and into Iowa, and then all the way up the East Coast as well into places like New York City, Philadelphia, DC, down to Virginia Beach, and then especially into the Carolinas. The only area that's favored for below average precipitation is in the northern Rockies for December, but it looks to be a very warm and wet December in much of the eastern two-thirds of the country. Now looking at January here. So January, it's not a complete flip, but it's a pretty solid flip here. So you can see that now below average temperatures are more so favored in the mid-Atlantic, but especially along the Gulf Coast right in here, and then also down to the southern plains. Above average temperatures are generally favored along the entire Canadian border from the northwest into the upper Midwest and into northern New England, with slightly above average temperatures in places like the upper mid-Atlantic, the lower northeast, going into California, and then into the central plains. Precipitation-wise, the Midwest still looks pretty dry for the month of January, as well as still much of the Rocky Mountains look relatively dry for the month of January here. The West Coast still looks wet for the month of January, and then really most of the East Coast, you see a good amount of greens and blues there, so you could see another active month for January on the East Coast. Now, February is your month for a potential big storm or two if you're in places like the South, the Mid-Atlantic, or even up into the Northeast. You can see that below average temperatures are favored in much of the lower 48, but especially in the Southeast and South Central plains here, with only above average temperatures favored in the Northwest and then also in the upper Midwest. But when you look at precipitation, this really screams to me like a big storm or two in the Mid-Atlantic and the Southeast right in here. These are areas that you could certainly see some wintry precipitation. Maybe not all the way down into Wilmington, but certainly into much of Virginia, western North Carolina, central North Carolina even, and then all the way, of course, into Pennsylvania, DC, New Jersey as well. Could certainly see a big storm in the month of February. The West Coast also looks pretty active for February. Once again, the only areas that look drier for February are in the Midwest, and then back into the northern Rockies, and now back into the Northwest here. Finally finishing up with the month of March here, and then we're going to get into the snowfall map. So I'm sure that that's what you've been waiting. We're going to get into that in just a second. Looking at the month of March here, it is not quite a photo finish in the upper Midwest and into the Northeast. We kind of revert back to that December pattern in March. So March could also be warm and wet in much of the country. You can see that those below average precipitation anomalies exist west of the Appalachians, but other than that, so many blues and greens here on the map for above average precipitation. Back into temperatures, the south could once again see a cooler than average month of March, but the north is generally warmer than average. Now let's look at percent of average snowfall during moderate to strong El Ninos. So right off the bat, you see some bigger signs here. Let's point it out in the southern plains, those deep blues, that could be well above average snowfall in those areas. Also in the mid-Atlantic and southern Appalachians, they could see well above average snowfall as well. Now, unfortunately, in the Midwest, from St. Louis to Pittsburgh, you can see that 50 to 75% of average. So that is solidly below average snowfall in those months. Also into the northern Rockies up here, you can see that's why we expect a poorer than normal ski season. The base for all that powder might not be quite as thick this upcoming season. Now down into the Great Basin, into the Sierra Nevadas, you can see above average snowfall in those areas down into the desert southwest here, like Flagstaff, Arizona. Flagstaff, Arizona averages actually some of the highest snowfall in the country, and you would probably never guess it, but they average upwards of 70 to 80 inches a year in Arizona, albeit at a very high elevation. So now let's look at a slightly different map here. So this is snow during the top 10 strongest El Nino events. We do expect this to be a top 10 strong El Nino event when compared to 1950 to 2009. So you can see right off the bat, the Great Lakes is favored to see below average snowfall. The Mid-Atlantic is favored to see above average snowfall. New England's kind of a toss-up, but it does favor slightly below average snowfall. And then back into the Southwest, you can see lots of deep blues here for above average snowfall. And then in the Northwest, you can see lots of deep browns for below average snowfall. Now, it is necessary to point out that this is just 10, 8, 6 inches here below average. So places that average hundreds of inches of snowfall in the Northwest or even in the Sierra Nevadas, you know, a difference of 10 inches is not that significant. So that's why I'm not as big of a fan as of this map than the other map, but it's still worth looking at. Now we're going to finish up with all moderate to strong El Nino events and what they produce in terms of temperatures and precipitation. So you can see that below average temperatures are generally favored across the southern US, and then above average temperatures are favored in the north. And that is what most winter outlooks, especially from official sources, are going to look like. For example, the National Weather Service winter outlook, they're typically on the slightly warmer side of things. So areas south of this line, we expect them to say average temperatures, and then areas above this line that we expect them to say above average temperatures. When it comes to precipitation, the East Coast looks pretty active, and I also expect their winter outlook to look pretty similar to this as well, with above average precipitation in all of these areas, and then the Midwest into the northern Rockies, drier than normal conditions is favored, and it does make sense. I don't blame them at all. When you look at all of these moderate to strong El Nino events, this is what it produced. So why would you guess against that, especially when we're not going to be seeing a west-based El Nino, which would be the most favorable El Nino of all? If anything, we could actually see an east-based El Nino, but let's hope not. Let's hope that we see more of a basin-wide El Nino event. That's been it for this video. Thanks for watching, everybody. We do have more videos just like this on your screen right now. If you want to check them out, that would be awesome. If not, I'll see you in the next one.